Good morning, ELA 4, here at the Center of Excellence, New England. Today is Monday, February 2nd. This is the beginning of a new semester, semester 2. We are roughly halfway through the year. Congratulations. Everyone more or less has made it through in one piece, as we say. So here we are with our first video for our first lesson of semester 2 in ELA 4. It is 2.09, Writing Your Narrative. So we have been doing some prep work on a narrative writing piece, mostly the research part. Remember, you were asked to pick one of 3 teenagers that has done something heroic to write about. And from the title of this lesson, it's kind of a clue. This is where we're going to begin the writing process. So if you look at the objectives here, after completing this lesson, I will demonstrate that I can create a first draft using ideas generated during the pre-writing process. That's the specific process we're going to delve into in this lesson, the pre-writing process. And our second objective, I can use descriptive language to add interest to a narrative. All right. Slide 2. Okay, so pretty common question in ELA 4, senior year English, whatever you want to call it. Uh, why do I have to write a first draft? So, with all of our modern technology, computers, software, AI, all this great stuff, um, we find ourselves asking ourselves these questions of like, why do I have to do all of this prep work? Um, I feel like I can pretty much just write an essay from scratch. Wrong. No. There's like 1 or 2% of the population that can actually do that, and they're called vomiters. And it's not a very common thing. And even if you are a vomiter, your essay is going to be much improved just by doing a little bit of prep. Also, for the purposes of this lesson, I'm not looking at a polished end product like an essay or anything. I'm going to see if you go through the pre-writing process. So this is the skill, the process that we're actually looking into. I do not want to say that the end product, the essay, is not worth anything. It just happens not to be the focal point of this particular lesson. The focal point of this particular lesson is this pre-writing process, what we do before we put pen to paper, although these days we're usually putting fingers on keys. Um, so why do we write a first draft? Uh, the most basic answer is so that you can catch some minor mistakes or errors that you might make on the first pass. Hence, first draft. That would suggest that there may be a third draft, a second, third draft, and you've also heard the phrase final draft. So, what you should understand is that it is a process that goes through many steps. Okay. Now, YSC says that writing a draft gives you the opportunity to put the pieces of your plan together and transform them into an actual narrative. Um, so, a corollary question is, why do I have to do all this prep work? Well, so you can write a first draft. The more prep work you do, not only in English class, you will find will benefit you greatly. So don't sleep on the pre-writing process. Okay, back to YC. They say as you write a first draft, your focus is on 4 of the 6 traits of writing. So here are the 4 traits they want you to focus on: ideas, voice, word choice, sentence fluency. Well chosen words will create a strong voice, and sentence fluency is required to make sure all the elements of your narrative flow from beginning to end. Slide 3. Okay, writing your narrative. Now is your chance to bring all the pieces of your pre writing plan and the techniques from the writer's handbook together to create a complete first draft of your narrative. As the author, you'll need to use everything you've learned about word choice, tone, pace, mood, and sentence fluency to tell an interesting and engaging story. Your story does not have to be long to accomplish this. Just look at the story of Justin and Andrea. It's only about a page long, but includes all of these elements. As you work through the rest of this lesson, you will compose your narrative step by step, from the exposition to the resolution. At each stage in the process, you will write a draft and then reflect on ways to make your writing even stronger. So, this is like a secondary answer to that question: why do I have to write a first draft? Well, it affords you the luxury of perspective. Once you've written something down, you can take a step back, maybe sleep on it, and when you return to your draft, you might be in a different mindset. You might have new ideas. Um, this is why we do this. Your draft will be based on the same topic that you chose for your narrative pre-writing graphic organizer. I know that we started on this before break, so this might be going way back in your memory banks to remember the pre-writing graphic organizer that we filled out for this uh, series of lessons here. As a reminder, your topic is one of these three teenage heroes that we had read about: Bethany Hamilton, Jordan Romero, or Khadijah Williams. After you've written your draft, ask yourself these questions: is my writing clear? Uh, Further questions to kind of lock in there would be: do I use precise words? Do I use certain words too often? You really want to limit the number of times that you repeat a certain word, unless that certain word is like a super technical word that you have to use. So that happens a lot in like science lab reports, things like that. Um, Adjectives, when you're describing things, you want to change it up. A thesaurus can help you with that. Precise words, you want to make sure that you're using the right word for the job. And you might just want to stop and consider if there are better words. A thesaurus, again, will help you with that. Doesn't have to be a paper bound actual book thesaurus. Merriam Webster online has a wonderful thesaurus that I use myself. So, second question: is my writing interesting? Can I add more descriptive words or vary the sentence structure? So, by varying the sentence structure, you do not want this essay to come out sounding like a newspaper article, very factual, and just like a recitation of the facts. Um, this should be a little more creative than that. You want to use your skills, like they say, to make things descriptive. You want to use interesting words for this. Is there anywhere I can answer why or how? Um, so you are writing this piece as if your reader has never heard of this person. All right. So even the most basic information about these people is fair game. And you can use that to answer some of the questions regarding why or how this person's a hero. Did I write too much? This is hardly ever a problem, but just ask yourself, does every sentence add something important to the story? Is there anything I can take away? So, this most likely will happen during a reread or a proofread of your work. You might come across a sentence that works, but doesn't absolutely have to be there. And so, this is a judgment call. Just ask yourself, does this make my work better? Or is it just kind of there? Does my story make sense? I hope so. But ask yourself, do the pieces fit together in the proper order? Is there anything I should rearrange? All right, so they have this interactive piece here. Move through this presentation to view revision in action. Okay, Andrew just finished writing a brief story about his summer job as a lifeguard at the city pool. Let's take a look. You'll see before we even read that some of this is pre-highlighted. I had a scary day at work. I was in the lifeguard stand and I heard someone yelling for help. I was scared. I looked around the pool to see who needed help. A boy was calling for help. I jumped in and swam to help him. He was scared, but he was okay. His mom was really glad I saved him. Okay, so factually, there's nothing really wrong with this writing. Uh, and I said factually because that's what this is. It's basically, like I said before, a recitation of the facts. It's like a newspaper report of what actually happened. There's not much descriptive or like creative language here. It's like I said, it's basically a report. And the little piece here says that Andrew's off to a good start, but his paragraph would benefit from a few changes. First, he needs to look for and highlight any general words or overused words. All right, so scared or scary, that root word, you can see it's were used at least 3 times. Scary, scared, scared. Um, in yellow, someone, a boy, okay. These are lower tier words. They're very simple. They get the job done, but they could be changed. Um, let's see how they decided to treat this. Boop. Okay, next, Andrew needs to review his writing to see if he can add some interest. All right, this is the same text, just a little more highlighting. Now, Andrew needs to look for places where he might have provided unnecessary information. I had a scary day at work. Um, it's not necessarily unnecessary. Kind of introduces the idea that this is like a stressful situation, but it's not absolutely 100% essential for this writing. So the way that they're advising you to go about this is that as you read and you notice some information, if the story works without the information, it can probably be eliminated. And so they're recommending here eliminating these 2 sentences. I had a scary day at work. We're going to figure that out once we figured out what the actual action of the story is. Any type of near drowning situation, we're going to naturally recognize that as a scary situation. And then the ultimate sentence, his mom was really glad I saved him. We're going to assume that would be the case. And I would take this out unless mom had like some really interesting reaction that you just had to tell the reader about. Um, you can see how asking yourself, does this really need to be here? Answer's probably no. Lastly, Andrew needs to see if any of the pieces of the story can be rearranged to give it better flow. So, you may have a much younger sibling or have like a younger cousin um, who is just, getting to the talking stage. Um, and when they tell stories, they're just like rapid firing facts out there. I went for a walk yesterday, and we went to the park, and the grass was green, and there was a dog in the park, and the dog was brown. And I went on the slide, and then it was raining, and then we went home. But then I thought about the brown dog. You see what I'm saying? It's like it's almost like they're talking to talk. Well, your first draft can sometimes read like that because your aim for your first draft is to get all that important essential information down, and so the order is not so important. You're really just racing to get all your ideas down, and so you can end up with something like that little child story. um, but here, more specifically with Andrew's example, he's trying to see if he can change the sequence. That might be something you need to look into if it's not logically in order. Unless you're trying for creative purposes to do that, you do want to make sure that the reader, with one read, can logically put together the sequence of the events of the story. So here he's looking at these 2 sentences. I was scared. I jumped in and swam to help him. How could we rearrange this? After answering all these questions, Andrew sat down to write a revised paragraph. Take a look at his new paragraph. It started as an ordinary day, with kids playing and splashing in the pool. I was enjoying the view from my lifeguard stand when, suddenly, I heard a boy calling for help from the deep end. I scanned the surface and saw a small boy with bright red hair slowly sinking under the water. everything I learned in lifeguard training rushing to my mind, I jumped in the pool to save him. I was so focused on getting to that sinking red head, I didn't notice other swimmers staring, or my arms and legs shaking, or my heart pounding in my chest. It seemed like hours before I finally reached him. Once I got the rescue tube under his arms and had him safely on the surface, I finally took a breath. Okay, now it says here, what do you notice about Andrew's revised story? First thing, visually, you can just see it's longer. There's more detail. Um, there's more variation in the verbs, like the action words that he's using. Like, just for example, he didn't look at the water; he scanned the surface. Um, it's a little more precise language. You can more mentally put yourself into the situation. You can imagine yourself like scanning across the surface of the water for this person. Um, you can just see how this is much better, much improved. Um, and really, all we did is take a second look at this paragraph. So, uh, not to beat a dead horse, but all of this questioning about, like, why do I have to do graphic organizers? Why do I have to do a first draft? Here, the proof is in the pudding, in Andrew's pudding here. Um, it is just going to make your work a lot better. All right. Slide 4. Exposition. We have a quote from The Sound of Music. Let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. Well, yes, obviously, because we want our writing to be logical. Makes sense that we should start at some point, and why not make that point the beginning? So, the first piece of your narrative is the exposition. Recall that the exposition tells your reader what they need to know. Background information is presented, main characters are introduced, and the conflict is established. Previously, you organized your ideas in a pre writing graphic organizer. Open your completed graphic organizer to begin writing your narrative. So, here at the Center of Excellence in our specific situation here, we had started this at the end of semester 1. Break happened, and now here we are, beginning of semester 2, picking it back up. So, you might have to find this file. It might be hidden away in your hard drive or in your Google Drive, but wherever it is, you want to dig it up because we're going to use it. Otherwise, you can use that link here to grab the file once again. Okay. Here, they're just giving you a text box for practice, and they're saying the narrative you type below will not be saved. Be sure to copy and paste your work into a document before moving on to the next page. Make sure that you do that if you are um, interacting with this piece. Um, and when you're done, I would suggest just like put one paragraph in here, and then they're giving you these questions so that you can go through the process that we had just outlined previously. Asking yourself, is my writing clear? Is it interesting? Did I write too much? Is there something I need to cut out? Does my story make sense? Again, you want to make sure that you're reading for someone who has no idea who your teenager that you've chosen is. Um, so there's no information about them that is like too basic. You want to include everything, uh, but you do want to balance that with this idea of, oh, did I write too much? You don't want to be too verbose, using too many words. You want to get all the information across in an interesting way, but we're not trying to fill up the page here with writing. We got to strike that fine balance. Slide 5. Rising action. So let's say we've completed the exposition. We have all the basic information given to the reader that we have deemed necessary. It's time to introduce the rising action. Stephen King quote here: you see something, then it clicks with something else, and it will make a story. I'm going to believe Stephen King. He's pretty rich off of his writing, so I'm going to trust that he knows what he's talking about. Okay, back to it. Now that you've written your exposition and given your readers the background information they need, it is time to start building the rising action. Recall that rising action includes conflicts and challenges encountered by the characters. How they respond keeps the story moving forward. And you've probably already realized that these three topics, these three teenagers that you had to choose from, all of them are going to have encountered conflicts and challenges um, that are very interesting. Um, you really only have to worry about the writing of this, not the content, which is nice. Um, Using the information from your pre writing plan, so the graphic organizer that you had been working on, write a first draft of your rising action. Make sure to include at least 2 lines of meaningful dialogue, so people speaking to each other. It could be simple single words, but you do want to make the words that these characters are saying to each other tie in very closely with the challenge that they face in particular. Okay. Here again, we have this type of interactive again. You want to, whatever writing you have, plop it in here and ask yourself these 4 questions again. Slide 6. Oops. The climax, everyone's favorite part. This is the most intense or exciting part. This is where the rising action reaches some sort of maximum intensity, right? Here we have a quote from Maya Angelou, former poet laureate of the United States, very famous woman, very good poet. I would encourage you to check out some of her poetry that she reads herself. She is much more than just her poetry, but enough on Maya Angelou. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. Let's get that story out. All right. YSC says you brought your readers along with you on a journey through various challenges and conflicts, all leading up to this point, the climax. Remember that the climax is the turning point in the conflict where the tension is built until the main character must make a decision or take action that determines the directions of the story. Using the information from your pre writing plan, the graphic organizer, write a first draft of your climax. So I'm sure you're recognizing the pattern here. We're going paragraph by paragraph, plunking it down through here and analyzing it with these 4 questions. Is my writing clear? Is my writing interesting? Did I write too much? Does my story make sense? Now that you've checked your writing using the guiding questions, take some time to make any necessary changes. So, what they're saying is once you've asked yourself these 4 questions, take the appropriate action. Just keep in mind that this isn't going to save any of the work you put in there, so you're going to want to copy and paste it back into a Google Doc. Slide 7. Falling action. Exactly what it sounds like. Rising action's over. It has reached its maximum intensity at the climax, and now we are on the way down of that hill. We have a quote from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Great is the art of beginning, but greater is the art of ending. Um, For some reason, it's much easier to begin a story than it is to end one, if we're talking artistically in an interesting fashion. If you're just writing down history, it takes care of itself. But if you are writing fiction, it's easy to start off, set up some conflicts, uh, but the real artistry is how do these characters overcome these conflicts, these challenges, and how does the author tie it up in not a resolution yet, but a falling action. So, YSC says you've reached the climax of your narrative. Now what? You must lead your reader through the falling action, the events that occur after the main character makes the key decision in the story. Again, using information from your pre writing plan, that's the graphic organizer, write a first draft of the falling action of your story. Note, this is another great place to incorporate meaningful dialogue between your characters. Mainly that's because, as you've heard, we've passed the climax, right? So the danger or the effort or whatever it is that your teenager has done, the, let's say, difficult part is probably over. That would have probably made up the climax. So your resolution is a good place for dialogue, because now you can get like the reaction of your characters for having done whatever it is that they did. Um, so that is a requirement. Just make sure that you have at least 2 lines of meaningful dialogue. Again, people talking to each other. So this should come in the form of quotes, and make sure that you handle those according to MLA 9. Um, you can check that document if you need to refresh yourself on MLA style. Um, now that you've checked your writing using the guiding questions, take some time to make any necessary changes. Once you feel like you have a solid draft, copy and paste your writing into a word processing document before moving on to the next page. Again, because this will not save your work. So on to slide 8. And here we are. No surprise, our last step is the resolution. Here we have a quote from Orson Welles, who was a auteur. Like, he was made radio shows, plays, just like anything creative at the time. He did, um, and he had a very distinctive voice. So another person from history that I invite you to view a couple YouTube videos about. Anyway, he says, if you want a happy ending, that depends, of course, on where you stop your story. YSC says, you have now taken your readers on a complete narrative journey from the exposition through the falling action. The only thing left to do is provide a resolution that answers all a reader's questions and ties up any loose ends. Using the information from your pre-writing plan, so your graphic organizer, write a first draft of the revolution. No, not a revolution, my bad. Resolution. Uh, those two things can be one and the same, but not for the purposes of this lesson. Do not write a first draft of a revolution. Resolution, much preferred. Um, Again, they're giving you a place to practice. So if this was nonfiction or some sort of research, analytical essay, what have you, this would be like your conclusion. However, this is much more of like a creative writing endeavor. So you don't have a conclusion as much as a resolution, and you are not trying to prove a point as much as relate how these challenges or problems were resolved, hence the resolution. So, same thing, plunk your writing down here, ask yourself these 4 questions, take any editing action that seems appropriate, make sure you save all of your text. Uh, Finally, here we are at slide 9. Lesson summary. In this lesson, you have progressed step by step through the draft writing process. You should now have a draft that includes all the pieces of a complete narrative. Look over the story you have created so far, checking for the 4 traits of writing that we've been concentrating on, which are the ideas, voice, word choice, and sentence fluency. After you've completed a final read through of your story and made any necessary changes, submit your first draft for grading. The length of your completed draft should be approximately 500 words. Um, so we should talk for 1 minute here about word count. This is a minimum, and I would suggest to you that when you see an assignment that is accompanied by a word count, a minimum word count, the logic behind that is that whoever's created this exercise or lesson, what they're telling you is that you're going to need at least 500 words to pull this off correctly. Um, if you're not writing 500 words, that means one of your sections is necessarily too short. Maybe you didn't spend enough time in your exposition and maybe you're missing information there. Or maybe your resolution is too short and it's unclear. Uh, Maybe you forgot to put in your dialogue. Remember, it said you needed at least 2 lines of dialogue in multiple places here. There's nothing wrong with adding more dialogue. You just have to have that minimum of 2. Uh, so, if you are struggling to get over 500 words, which, I mean, I've seen you guys write before, and that really shouldn't be a problem. But um, there's some strategies to get around that, like I said. Um, they're actually also going to help you out by supplying you with some links to what are called exemplars, or examples of completed work. So it says here, if you need a little help, read a sample narrative based on Jackie Robinson. That'll show you how uh, someone else has completed this, not with the same topic, so you can get a general idea of what they're looking for. If you're wondering where the points will come from in the assignment, here's a link to your rubric. It says here, please do not submit your final draft until you have received feedback on your first draft from your instructor. Um, yes, keep in mind what you are submitting here is going to be your first draft. So you are going to want to, at some point, kind of stop the editing process, call that your first draft, and submit it, uh, because it's highly suggested here that you are going to polish it for a final draft. So, again, what you're going to be submitting here is considered a first draft. In the future, you will bring it a little bit further um, with editing and revision, and it will become a final draft. So if you think you have your final draft already, you don't. Just keep in mind, we're going to keep chipping away at this, keep working on it. Okay, that is it for this lesson in particular. Um, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, of course, you can always reach out to me through Slack 24/7, and I will endeavor to get back to you as soon as I can. Other than that, happy Monday, guys. Have a great week, and I'll see you around.